national libraries. We're excited to feature national libraries because why? I think there are several words that could be used to describe national libraries: perseverance, determination, preservation, and we could continue on with the words. But the real reason why we're here during these incredibly extraordinary times is that national libraries play an important role for other libraries, but also scholarly communities. We're joined here today by librarians, scholars, students, and independent scholars as well are part of this webinar to hear about what national libraries are doing. And of course, the Library of Congress is unique, and the inaugural start to this series features them, and I'm so delighted that they have joined us. And again, the goals that we're trying to achieve with this series is to make national libraries more accessible. Of course, they're accessible now, but hopefully through this series and these presentations and discussions, we will put the spotlight on some of the search tools, services, digital collections, and portals that have been introduced. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Olga Makarova, to give a quick overview of the Slavic Reference Service, and then we're going to turn it over to our LC colleagues. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joe. Hello, everyone. My name is Olga. I also work at the Slavic Reference Service. Slavic Reference Service is a part of International Area Studies Library at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. Since 1976, Slavic Reference Service provides reference and research assistance in all subject areas related to Russian, East European, and Eurasian studies. We offer consultations, instruction sessions, organize workshops, and panel discussions. We support faculty, students, researchers, scholars, work with other librarians, but as Joe mentioned, our work wouldn't be possible without resources and support provided by national libraries. We are excited to launch this series and meet national libraries, and we are grateful to the Library of Congress for starting us off. Without any further ado, let me introduce today's speakers. First of all, I'd like to thank Nicole Marcoux, confidential assistant to the Principal Deputy Librarian of Congress, who kindly agreed to be in charge of slides for our speakers' presentations. And one housekeeping thing, as you can see on the next slide with our program, we'll have Q&A session at the end, but you can type your questions at any moment in the chat, and my colleague Karen will read them during the Q&A session. And now I turn it over to our first speaker, Jake Sweeney, Principal Deputy Librarian of Congress.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. I'm Mark Sweeney, Principal Deputy Librarian of Congress, and it's a pleasure to be with you today. I'd like to thank Joe Lenkart and the Slavic Reference Service for arranging this opportunity for us to meet virtually. It's great to see such a diverse audience for today's session, the first session. My colleagues and I have prepared a full tour de force presentation to introduce you to the Library of Congress, the nation's first federal cultural institution and the largest library in the world. So next slide, please. Our presentation today will be in 7 segments. I'll begin with a broad overview of the 4 core functions of national libraries. I'll introduce you to our 2019-2023 strategic plan, Enriching the Library Experience, and briefly cover the library's organizational structure. I'll then turn it over to my colleagues, each of whom will introduce you to some of the key programs and initiatives that demonstrate the library's strategy in action, and also exemplify how we're fulfilling our core functions as America's de facto national library. Next slide, please. So it's my understanding that you're going to have an opportunity through this series to hear from several national libraries. So at a most basic level, what makes a national library? Well, first, a national government designates the institution to one degree or another. The responsibilities will necessarily vary from country to country based on the unique history, culture, and politics. But what's apparent with all is that the national libraries generally exercise 4 core functions. A recent IFLA National Library Section survey of national libraries confirmed that those to be the following. So number 1, build a national collection. Perhaps the most fundamental function of a national library is to build a national collection of its national imprint, the cultural heritage of its people, as recorded in a wide variety of works in many, many different formats. Second, preserve the national collection. Well, that's just a natural extension of the collecting mandate. It's a core responsibility to ensure the preservation of the national collection for current and future generations of users. Third, enable discovery of the national collection. So national libraries provide controlled bibliographic discovery of national heritage collections through online catalogs, finding aids, and a national bibliography. Metadata is the key to making these collections accessible. And then finally, of course, providing access. Ultimately, the purpose of the first 3 activities is to make the nation's knowledge and cultural output accessible to national constituencies, which are typically designated by law or regulation. So while virtually all national libraries, I think, consider these activities to be core to their mission, there's no single approach to how countries situate their national libraries. Some are standalone entities, others are part of other institutions like a national university, but they definitely have these 4 core functions. So next slide, please. So for example, the Library of Congress clearly shares with other national libraries the 4 core functions that I just detailed. However, its aspirations and work are much more expansive than many peers. I think the Library of Congress historian John Cole best framed the agency as, quote, occupying an important crossroads in American life, a place where the nation's political and literary cultures intersect. Over the last 220 years, it's evolved into a multifaceted cultural institution serving a national and international audience through a wide array of activities, programs, and services. An agency of the legislative branch of the US federal government, the Library of Congress is the major research arm of Congress, America's de facto national library, the nation's copyright agency, provider of a national library service for the blind and print disabled, and a partner in bibliographic and digital network development. I believe that its dual nature as both the legislative library for the United States Congress and the de facto national library is a key reason for the library's continued success. The effective combination of these 2 basic functions has brought together the concerns of government, librarianship, and scholarship. An unusual combination, but one of great benefit for American society and culture. So how is the Library of Congress positioning itself for the next few years? The Library of Congress 2019 to 2023 strategic plan, which we have entitled Enriching the Library Experience. This is our roadmap for expanding the library's national reach and deepening our impact. The mission is to engage, inspire, and inform Congress and the American people with a universal and enduring source of knowledge and creativity. That enduring source, of course, is the national collection, as well as the expertise of our staff. Also, as a steward of a unique, universal, and ever-growing national collection that belongs to the American people, the Library of Congress has a mandate to inspire, inform, and serve all Americans by engaging their cultural and intellectual curiosity and creativity. And that leads to our vision, which very intentionally is aspirational. All Americans are connected to the Library of Congress. Every one of us at the agency will connect our work to one or more of the 4 goals that you see in the center of the slide. First goal is expand access. Make our unique collections, experts, and services available when, where, and how users need them. Whether you're visiting us here on Capitol Hill or you're accessing the library remotely. Second strategic goal is to enhance services, creating meaningful experiences for every user by elevating digital experiences, transforming our in-person experiences, and developing more user-centered content. Our third goal is to optimize our resources, continue our work to modernize, strengthen, and streamline our operational capabilities, invest in our staff for the future, and to diversify and expand our funding to do even more to connect people to our collections and services. And finally, our fourth goal, which is to measure our impact. We're committed to gathering and using data to better understand our users and to share the powerful story of the impact that we have on the world around us. So how do we actualize these strategic goals at the Library of Congress? And how does this work reflect the evolution of national libraries in the 21st century? So at the Library of Congress, we identify opportunities for the agency to build towards its long-term vision through shorter-term objectives. The work is never done, but constantly evolving to meet the needs of our users and to match the extent of our resources. Furthermore, everything we're doing right now at the Library of Congress clearly reflects the four core functions of a national libraries that I detailed a little earlier. So now I'll talk a little bit about how the library is organized. So the Library of Congress encompasses several integral service units. Starting on the far right side of the chart is the Office of the Librarian, which provides the leadership and executive management to the library, setting policy and directing programs and activities to accomplish the agency's mission. Continuing on from the far left side of the chart is the Library Collections and Services Group, which we call LCSG, which brings together the three separate units that are responsible for acquiring, stewarding, describing, and serving library collections. That would be the Law Library, Library Services, and the National Library Service for the Blind and Print Disabled. Led by the Deputy Librarian for Library Collections and Services, LCSG provides centralized management at the group level to enable coordinated vision, leverage systems and expertise, create economies of scales, and make administrative functions more efficient. The Law Library was established by Congress in 1832, has the primary mission to provide Congress with timely, innovative, and high-quality foreign, comparative, international, and U.S. law research and reports. And this afternoon, Jane Sanchez, the Deputy Librarian for Library Collections and Services and the Law Librarian, will introduce the library's online resources, historic reports, and digitization efforts. Library Services, that's the largest administrative unit in the Library Collections and Services group. With over 1,200 staff members, it's responsible for many of the traditional functions performed by a national library. Robin Dale, our Associate Librarian for Library Services, will introduce the library's digital collections and services. The National Library Service for the Blind, NLS, administers the free library service that provides Braille and talking books to people who cannot read standard print due to visual, physical, perceptual, or reading disabilities. And our NLS Director, Karen Kenninger, is also with us this afternoon, and she'll briefly discuss how digital modernization expands access for the blind and print disabled. The Office of the Chief Information Officer is a centralized team of technology professionals working to transform the Library of Congress into a data-driven and digitally enabled institution. It also delivers IT security, network operations, and user services for all library employees. Kate Zward, our Digital Strategy Director, will introduce you to LC Labs and its work to experiment towards our digital strategy. The Congressional Research Service works exclusively for the United States Congress. For more than 100 years, its mission's been to serve Congress with the highest quality of research, analysis, information, and confidential consultation to support its legislative oversight and representational duties as a co-equal branch of government. Cliff Cohen, CRS's Associate Director for Legislative Information Services, is also with us this afternoon, and he'll briefly discuss congress.gov, the official website of the U.S. Federal Legislative Information. The U.S. Copyright Office, led by the Register of Copyrights, administers the nation's copyright laws for the advancement of the public good and for the benefit of authors and users of creative works. Maria Strong, the Associate Register of Copyrights and Director of Policy and International Affairs, and Sean Gallagher, Management and Program Analyst in the Office of Public Records and Repositories, will introduce you to the Copyrights Office's modernization efforts. So next slide, please. So In conclusion, I'll turn it over to Robin Dale, our Associate Librarian for Library Services, who will introduce you to the library's digital collections and services. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Mark. And I share my thanks to Joe and his colleagues for inviting us to be with you today. So as the largest library in the world, the collections of the Library of Congress are vast. As of last year's count, we're up to over 170 million items. Now, we could take all day and into next week talking about those, but because we're here today and we're in a pandemic situation where we really want to know what you can get to today from where you're sitting. And so I'll focus on our digital collections that are available online and that you can go off and peruse at any point in time. The library has been digitizing collections since the early 1990s. And over that period of time, there were a variety of systems that were created that house these collections. And over the last few years, we've really worked to try to bring these together into a unified site so that you can go to loc.gov, go into the search box, and next to it, it'll say search everything. And if you just hit return, you'll get that, what you see. I'm sorry, Nicole, if you can advance the slide there. You will get what you can see on the slide here on the right, which is really an idea of the amount of collections that we have available and information also that we have available on the website. Now, stuff is constantly uploaded. The numbers are a little bit interesting because sometimes it talks about a particular item and sometimes it's a collection of items. So I'm going to run through some of these things today, but it gives you an idea of the kinds of materials we have and some approximate numbers or collections. So I'll run through them very briefly. Thank you. So if I start with our film and audio recordings, we have a ton of this kind of material throughout the library and library collections. At our National Audio Visual Conservation Center, where we do a lot of the collecting work as well as the preservation and providing various forms of access, they have made a lot of their material, the public domain material that we can make available, through two different services. One is the National Screening Room, and so hundreds of hours of public domain materials, so movies, old paper prints of movies, and public domain films that are on the National Film Registry are available through the National Screening Room. In the National Jukebox, we have historical sound recordings that are available. Both of these obviously free of charge, again, in public domain kinds of materials where we clearly have rights to do this. The Jukebox has extraordinary recordings from collections as well as other contributing libraries and archives. The American Archive of Public Broadcasting is also a really interesting and newer resource. And that's a project in partnership with the WGBH Foundation, as well as WGBH in Boston, where they're preserving significant public radio and television programs, and they're making them accessible. And if you'll see, it looks like we lost the URL that used to be under there. It's, we can send that to you, but it's americanarchive.org. And so that's at a different website. And that includes things like local television news, full interviews with PBS history series, such as 1964, Africans in America, Eyes on the Prize, the Stonewall Uprising, and more. So access to a lot of material from public news and public broadcasting. The American Folklife Center is mainly collections from the American Folklife Center, and that was originally founded as the Archive of American Folk Song back in 1928, but it's grown beyond that to contain materials that are a broad range of historical and cultural documents, and they are of all sorts of natures on contemporary American topics, traditional culture from all over the world, early field recordings, sound recordings, and many of those have been digitized and they're available through the American Folklife Center. And finally, the Veterans History Project, which is a very important project for the library. And this is a congressionally supported program that collects, preserves, and makes available the personal accounts of American war veterans so that future generations can hear directly from the veterans and better understand the realities of war. Next slide, please. So this is a preview for you. This hasn't been launched really and made available, but it's another example of the new kinds of audio content that we are daily making available and creating. And this is, so this sneak preview of this new AV program that will be released online, is a signature project of poet laureate Joe Harjo, and it's called Living Nations, Living Worlds. And as you can see here, it's a digital collection of 47 contemporary Native American poets reading and discussing an original poem on a certain topic. It's fascinating. It's part of that work. You'll see publicity about this, but there's a soft launch. If you go to the website, you'll be able to see that as well. Next slide, please. Our manuscript collections. The library's manuscript collections are arguably, I'll say this because we were the first up, arguably the best collection of unique manuscripts, unique collections in the world. And it was established in 1897 as one of the original special departments as a part of the library. And we've been collecting in this area since. It's one of the, it was one of the first collections that we started to digitize back in the 90s because we were really looking to provide access to unique collections, not the common published collections where people would be able to find at other libraries. And you can see some exemplar photographs down here at the side, photographs from our collections of women's suffrage, Rosa Parks and her papers, presidential collections. We have presidential papers from 23 different presidents that are available online that you can go through. And then finally, we have other collections that we do in support of exhibits, and we bring things together. So the bottom one you'll see is the collection we have related to Jackie Robinson and other baseball highlights, Branch Rickey papers, one of the first people to really get into baseball as a business, and there were movies made about that. Next slide, please. Prints and photographs. The Prints and Photographs division contains just a broad spectrum of the visual arts, and some of the major categories are displayed here. You can see that they include some really well-known items, such as Dorothea Lange's Migrant Mother in the upper left-hand corner there, a very recognizable piece of the Farm Security Administration Office of War Information Black and White Negative collection, and also some really fantastic and lesser-known collections, like the Work Progress Administration's posters, similar to the one that I selected and put below. The Highsmith Archive is also really interesting, more of a recent or contemporary collection for the library, but important because it contains photos taken from across the United States, and they have very few rights restrictions on them, so people can go in and use them with certain restrictions and caveats that are shown there. Now, Prints and Photographs also has their own Prints and Photographs online catalog, and so some of the material is available there. It has very rich metadata beyond just the search that's on the website. Additionally, some collections, because of rights issues, only thumbnails will display to you. Well, you'll see as you go through others, you'll get full images of various resolutions, but some of the rights restricted photos require you to come on site to get beyond a thumbnail. Next slide, please. So moving into some of our other collections and published materials, the library has been very pleased to participate in a joint program with the National Endowment for the Humanities and as part of the National Digital Newspaper Program. Its result is Chronicling America. You see the URL here on the slide. It's over 17 million pages, 2.6 million issues of digitized content from 48 states. And I would suggest you go in there. It's full text that's available. You can search and find all sorts of really interesting information. And it's been used more and more as a part of teaching and learning right now, as people are looking for online resources that they can use within their classrooms. Next slide, please. So we also have a very extensive area studies collections throughout the library. And so I wanted to give a couple exemplars of the collections we have, because it really does speak to what Mark was talking about earlier, that we're a little bit different from other national libraries in that we collect beyond the American imprint, but we also have a very extensive collection of non-US materials. And so this, the next few slides will show you a couple examples of that. And you can see these here from the Asian division, from Chinese rare materials through North Korean materials, and even a Tibetan oral history archive project. Next slide, please. The Hispanic division covers Latin American, Caribbean, and the Iberian Peninsula. Not only do they have digitized texts and works available, but they also have the recently released Palabra archive, which provides access to that archive. And it's a collection of audio recordings of poets and writers from Latin America, the Iberian Peninsula, the Caribbean, and other regions with Luso-Hispanic heritage. It's been in our news more recently, and I would invite people to come and think about it. I think one of the questions that came into earlier to us was what other kinds of collections do we have, and collections in other languages, and obviously these examples are some of them. Next slide, please. Another outstanding set of collections that we have are in the Africa and Middle Eastern division. Just a few exemplars here with a nice image. Some of you may have heard of the Omar Ibn Said collection, which made national news. It is the 1831 autobiography of this gentleman, and it is the only extant memoir of a slave in America that was written in Arabic. It's been the subject of a play that was written. It was supposed to be featured at the Spoleto Festival before it too had to be canceled. But a lot of very, very interesting collections have been digitized by the African and Middle Eastern division lately, and I would invite you to come see these outstanding collections. Next slide, please. So after all of that, I'm going to turn a little bit to traditional books and serials as I roll towards the end here. The library hasn't concentrated on extensive book digitization. They're by and large not unique materials for us, and many other libraries have digitized these collections. Those that we did digitize are available through HathiTrust, and those would be our public domain volumes. So those are linked from our catalog, or you can search on HathiTrust. We also provide access to over 1,000 databases, and you can see the numbers here on the slide in terms of serials, books, and content within there. Those are available online only. I put this here only so that you would understand we do have them, but they are available on site. We also have a lot of material coming into the library through copyright and e-deposit of copyright. And because we are the home to the Copyright Office, as Mark explained, we're very careful about the content that we make available. And so we have a system called Stacks, and you need to be on site to use these. And I know there was a question about it, which is why I'm addressing it here. But it complies with all of the rights restrictions. And right now we have books and serials from Copyright e-deposit. We have digitized fragile newspapers that we digitize through our preservation department. And soon we'll be able to add new content with AV and manuscripts. Next slide, please. This is an exemplar from our science, technology, and business of the kinds of books and that we may do, that we also have kind of small special collections of them. This is, I've had a chance to view this not only in the digital form, but in person. So the early community cookbooks from across America. And it's just a fun collection of materials because it really does provide this snapshot of history and women's history and community sharing, because many of these early cookbooks talk about community culture as a part of those items that are in there. Next slide, please. So finally, I'm going to talk about the digital services very quickly. I will talk about By the People, which is our crowd transcription service that we have, crowdsourcing, Ask a Librarian, research guides, and finally interlibrary loan. Next slide, please. So By the People crowdsourcing is something that's very exciting for us. It's been going on a couple of years, and it was actually started in LC Labs. And Kate Sword was one of the fantastic people that picked this up and ran with it. It was such a success that it's been transformed from a project to a program, and you can see the numbers here. So this is a place where we take digitized manuscript content. My picture here is a little bit of a misnomer here because it's not things that we can just scan and then OCR to get the full text.
Okay, Google, stop.
I'm sorry. So it's something that you can see here. There's a broad variety of information, and you can, users can come to the library, can participate in the By the People crowdsourcing and contribute to this. All of the transcription goes back into our collections and supports full text searching of those collections. Next slide, please. Ask a Librarian is a service that many people provide. We've transitioned to a new service recently that underpins this, but like many other libraries, we have this service. Anybody would be able to come to the library and interact with over 300 librarians that provide access to our collections and information about them. And they're often divided by reading room, but you can go into a central point and be referred on if you do not know exactly where to begin. Next slide, please. So our research guides, many organizations use LibGuides, which is the basis of our research guides. We have over 700 of them at this point, and this is just an exemplar of them clustered together here, a few of them. We also have story maps that help further users engage with collections beyond just doing searches of things. This particular one is the story map that really helps users engage with our collections by linking images and text across space and time. And it is about Susie King Taylor, and she is known as the first African-American Army nurse. It recently won an award from the archival community, and I would encourage you to take a look at some of the story maps we have. And then finally, next slide, our interlibrary loan service, another service that we have that many libraries do. Of course, we tend to be a library of last resort, but when others cannot provide the content, but our rich and vast collection of volumes that we've built up over the years are available. And so we're able to share our collections that way. And with that, I will stop, thank you. And I will turn it over to Jane Sanchez, who I believe is next.
Unmute. Okay, I'm trying to start my camera. Start video. Let's see. The host has stopped my video. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get started anyway. I apologize. I'm not sure why I can't get my video going. If Joe or someone can work that out, I'm happy to be on camera. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jane Sanchez. I'm Deputy Librarian for Library Collections and Services, and I also serve as the 25th Law Librarian of Congress. Joe, thank you so much for organizing this meeting today. Mark and Robin, thank you so much for getting us started. And now I'd like to tell you about the Law Library of Congress. Due to the pandemic, I know we've all adapted to a new normal that is largely functioning virtually. Therefore, I'm going to focus on the Law Library's online resources. However, I'd like to begin with a brief overview of the Law Library of Congress. Next slide, please. The Law Library of Congress is the largest, most authoritative law library in the world. Pursuant to its Establishment Act of July 14, 1832. Okay, let's see. I just got a note. Here we go. Hi, everyone. Hello. Pursuant to the Establishment Act, the Law Library is directed to serve all three branches of government, U.S. government. That's legislative, executive, and judicial. The Law Library has approximately 3 million bound volumes of primary legal resources and maintains over 100 million microforms, 99,000 reels of microfilm, 3 million pieces of microfiche, and over 15,000 tangible electronic resources. These are CD-ROMs and other disks. The collection encompasses 300 legal systems and jurisdictions in all publishing formats. Library acquisitions come in via cataloging and publication. Some publishers send us their pre-published titles so that we can provide cataloging. So we get titles through cataloging and publication, through our copyright office, through exchanges, through gifts, federal transfer, and purchase. And since 1962, the Library of Congress has maintained 6 offices abroad in Cairo, Islamabad, Jakarta, Nairobi, New Delhi, and Rio de Janeiro. Those offices acquire, catalog, preserve, and distribute library and research materials from countries where those materials are unavailable through conventional acquisition methods. We can't find vendors in those parts of the world, so they are absolutely essential to what we're doing in the law library. Since 60% of the law library is foreign law materials, the law library relies on those overseas offices quite a bit, as you can imagine. Next slide, please. That's not quite the slide I'm looking at. It's the one with contact tracing. There you go, perfect. There are multiple ways to find the vast amount of data made available by the law library. The screen lists a number of those online resources. I need to tell you about the law library that many law librarians, many also with Juris Doctorate degrees, which are law degrees, staff the reading room and provide reference service in US and state law and assist patrons navigating the library's collections. Reading room staff also provide instruction and classes to congressional staff and congressional members and the public. Anyone can request assistance via Ask a Librarian, which you can see on the screen here. And I saw that someone asked for some strange questions. I have a couple. One requester asked the law library to assist him with the purchase of an F-16 fighter jet that was in a foreign country because he wanted to fly it around in the US as a hobby. Another requester asked how to report unlawful use of artificial intelligence in humans, which we scratched our head on that one. And another, can a deceased previous owner be put back on a deed or homeowner insurance policy as an insured party, which of course makes no sense. In addition to the reading room, the law library differs from traditional libraries in a significant way. Beyond the public reading room, the law library's foreign legal specialists publish in-depth, comprehensive research on US, foreign, comparative, and international law in response to congressional and agency requests. Our staff of 80 experienced foreign and American trained lawyers and law librarians hail from 20 countries and are fluent in over 40 languages. Many of the staff preceded their law library time with us, working for national legislatures, courts in their countries, executive agencies in their countries, or they practiced law privately, or they taught law school in their countries of origin. Their law degrees are generally from their countries that they represent, and they have advanced law degrees in this country, in the US, which is an LLM. Their law degrees are from their countries. As I said, their foreign law specialists author reports or country responses. Some of the examples recently, we've done a number of country responses to the pandemic. Last year, we did quite a few reports on Brexit because it was very much in the news at that point. We've done reports on global artificial intelligence regulation, contact tracing this year, taxation of cryptocurrency, just to name a couple. Now I'd like to highlight several other resources. The Law Library of Congress Legal Research Institute. Just before the pandemic upended our lives, we launched a new formal training center called the Legal Research Institute. You can see it in the top left of the screen. The Institute formalized training and instruction offered by our law library staff. During the year before the pandemic, staff provided in-person training, but then we had to, of course, transition to virtual training when everything went kaflooey. For folks who cannot attend trainings when they are offered, we developed an archive of recorded past presentations and orientations, and they're available at the page at the URL that you see on the screen. The Law Library also hosts an ABA award-winning blog called In Custodia Legis. It recently celebrated its 10th anniversary, and this year alone was visited over 700,000 times. Another online law library publication is the Global Legal Monitor, again on your screen. It covers legal news and developments worldwide in law. It's updated daily, and it draws on information from official national legal gazettes, publications, and reliable press sources. Next thing I wanted to mention was I noticed a question about stacks, and stacks is rights restricted material. Staff and patrons on site can view and print content only. Unfortunately, because the material is rights restricted, we are not allowed to download and distribute digital copies of those titles through interlibrary loan. Next slide, please. Okay, where possible, we are converting our tangible public domain and unrestricted rights materials to digital. Here, let me see if I can start my video again. Oh, there we are. Okay. In addition to publishing our current legal reports on at the area you see on the slide, we also have some other titles that we have digitized as well. Next slide. In 2019, the Law Library of Congress, in collaboration with the U.S. Government Publishing Office, began a multi-year effort to digitize and make accessible some 15,000
Jane, you might want to try turning off your video. That might help. It looks like we lost Jane again.
Okay. All righty. I think, well, we have Cliff on standby.
Yes.
Ready to go at a moment's
Yes.
notice.
Yes. Perhaps we should move ahead to Cliff.
Shall we?
Yeah, and then if Jane joins, maybe someone can just shoot her a message. Cliff, are you ready?
Perfect.
Cliff, you just need to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Very good. Hi, my name is Cliff Cohen, and it's a pleasure to highlight the library's role with and what is presented on the website congress.gov. Congress.gov is the official website for U.S. federal legislative information. Legislative information is produced daily and by multiple sources within the legislative branch of government. This includes the Clerk of the House, the Secretary of the Senate, the Government Publishing Office, and the library's Congressional Research Service, all producing different sets in different systems that make up Congress.gov. In addition, in regards to historical information, the Law Library partners with GPO, as Jane was saying, to produce historical data sets which are eventually published on Congress.gov. It's developed and maintained by the library at the request of Congress, and it consolidates and connects this information for your use. Within the Library of Congress, Congress.gov is a collaboration primarily among three service units: the Law Library of Congress, who for the Congress.gov supports non-congressional audience, the Office of the Chief Information Officer, who's responsible for the development and infrastructure support of Congress.gov, and the Congressional Research Service, or CRS, including specifically my office, which is focused on producing value-added information for Congress.gov, ensuring the day-to-day data integrity of and congressional help support for the system, and coordinating with all the internal and external partners to ensure day-to-day data integrity, as well as a continuous enhancement and modernization of Congress.gov in support of congressional and constituent priorities. Next slide, please. Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution grants all legislative powers to make laws to a bicameral Congress, the House of Representatives and Senate, that are results of a great compromise, seeking to balance the effects of the popular majorities through representation in the House, where the number of members per state are based on population, with the interests of the states through representation in the Senate, where there are 2 senators elected per state. One could perhaps think of Congress.gov as the integrated modern day end results of Article 1, Section 5 of the Constitution in regards to the chambers publishing of their results. The main point here, though, is that each of the chambers on their own terms are the ultimate decision makers when it comes to what and how legislative data and documents are presented on Congress.gov. Our role in the library is to coordinate and support their communicated interests. Next slide, please. House and Senate rules require the chambers and committees to produce calendars, make votes, as well as a myriad of other documents that are made available. While print remains the official version for legislation, within the last decade or so, digital versions of data like the House's committee repository or the Senate's executive calendar that's placed on the web have started to be reflected in the rules. Next slide, please. The founding legislative mandate for Congress.gov is embodied in both 2 USC, that stands for United States Code 180 and 181. United States Code, especially for our international audience, is the consolidation and codification by subject matter of the general and permanent laws of the United States. For the last decade, we have been developing and enhancing a single modernized Congress.gov for both Congress and their constituents, thereby enabling the retirement of legacy first-generation web systems. Thomas, some may have heard of for the public, which was retired in 2016, and the LIS in November of last year, which was a congressionally focused system and interface. Looking at the bottom right of the graphic, denoted by the LIS logo in blue, Congress.gov is still relying on a substantial part of the back end of LIS for data management, enhancement, and data interchange with our data partners. It is our priority over the next 2 to 3 years to not only keep releasing new capabilities and data every 3 weeks, like clockwork, but also in doing so, retire this legacy dependency that we have. At the top of the graphic, in looking at the purple and the burnt orange boxes, House and Senate members introduced legislation to the volume of approximately 16,000 bills each Congress, with each Congress being a 2-year time period. This both enables members to communicate with other members within the chambers as to their interests, as well as back to the constituents as to what they're seeing as their legislative priorities and showing their constituents they're working for them. Depending on the policy areas then and precedents in both the respective parliamentarians in the House Clerk's office and the Secretary of the Senate, assigns the bills to appropriate committees within their respective bodies. As the legislation potentially moves through each of the many stages and steps of the legislative process, data is communicated from the House and Senate directly to the Congress.gov data repository in blue on a daily basis, with textual documents first going to our partner, the Government Publishing Office, that marks it up in both print and digital format, with the digital format then moving on to our system, our repository, for presentation on Congress.gov. 3 points to make with this data flow is that data integrity and availability of Congress.gov is of the utmost importance, with there being no congressional tolerance for anything less. It's unlike other systems where they release in beta and have the users help find the mistakes. Everything is expected at a level of perfection when it's released to Congress and its constituents. All the organizations presented in this diagram have related systems and processes with cross-organizational dependency. The data flows in multiple ways back and forth between the organization. And finally, modernizing the format, the delivery mechanisms, and input and output processing of legislative data requires multi-year planning and collaboration among all these organizations. Next slide, please. So what's available on Congress.gov that may be of interest to you? First and foremost, it's a retrieval system for the tracking and accessing the results of the legislative process. To that end, I'm going to give a very abbreviated overview, given time, as to how this can be accomplished. On the left side, if you're outside of Congress, this is what you see as your default view on the home page. You will notice a single search box, which is what the public has told us they prefer to deal with and work with, not unlike what you find on Google, Amazon, and many, many other systems. You'll notice right below that single search box is a little tab there in dark blue titled More Options. And to the right of this slide is what is the default view for those within Congress. You can see that it's more detailed, it's collection-based. It allows for those on the Hills who have an idea what they're looking for and have done it times before to more quickly get to the information that they're looking to get at to perform their many, many responsibilities that folks on the Hill happen. It also gives more precision. In addition, over the single search bar is you'll see an option to get to advanced searches, which we provide 3 different views of it. And to the right of the advanced search link is the browsability, which gives many, many reports based on user behavior as to what are the typical types of reports that congressional and public users are looking to gain access to. So almost canned searches. And for those who have a highly complex search, that are researchers and are looking for an answer to and don't quite know what the advanced tool to use, you'll notice that to the right there's a link called Search Tools that provides an extensive, on the upper right corner, extensive aid and help support to get you started on becoming a U.S. federal legislative librarian extraordinaire. Directly below that single search box, you'll see a gray area across the page that on the left provides a dynamic feature of the most popular bills based on public usage. And to the right of that are the most popular links, including to the public laws and the U.S. code that I just mentioned, as well as appropriations. The next section directly below that in red, it's titled Current Legislative Activities. Those are links to the Hill, to the House and the Senate as to what's happening today, tomorrow, recently, what's happening within committee meetings. It's a more live, how do I get to the information today that may be happening on the Hill? And directly below that is also in red, the final section, major section in red is called Current Members of Congress, which you can search them up and get access, not only to their contact information and their personal websites, but also to what legislation they have sponsored or co-sponsored and where it is through the legislative process. Next slide, please. Very quickly here are 2 results pages. The first one is a result of a search from the main body, the main search page on the home page, where I typed in COVID-19 in quotes. And then I did some faceted searching on the left side under the status of legislation to say I only wanted laws, and it brought up to me the 9 laws that were passed during this current Congress having to go deal with COVID-19. that moves through the entire process. On the left-hand faceted search, you can see many, many other ways that you can hone on in to what committee or what subject area or co-sponsors or chamber of origin or bill types. It gives you a lot to work with. Picking one of those bills, the HR 748, the CARES Act, on the right side of the screen, is an example of a bill, what we call a bill object page. And on that page, it provides the ability, it summarizes it up top as to where it is, the process, the latest action, how to get to the text. And below that is a summary of that bill, which is one of the activities also performed by my office. For the 18,000 versions of bills that go through the legislative process each Congress, they are summarizing upon introduction, a brief summary as to what the bill is about. And as it moves through the legislative process, it's actually analyzing and reporting on how it actually affects the U.S. code that I mentioned before. In the middle of the page above the summary is a bunch of tabs. And so for this example, you could look at 4 prior bill summaries for earlier versions of the bills, view the 6 versions of the actual bill text that were produced as it moved through the legislative process, or I think it's the 46 actions that were acted upon as part of the legislative process, 24 different titles that were assigned to it, 16 amendments, or maybe that's 15, the 300 plus co-sponsors, the fact it went through 2 committees, and what other bills are related to that. Because often final bills are agglomeration of what members have interest in individual bills, and they like to see those things reflected in the final bill. Next slide, please. This is a summary page of the collections as well as the capabilities of Congress.gov. In total, there are what we define as 7 major collections, totaling about 30 data sets. And while legacy systems required users to know which silo of information or which physical library shelf to check, the modern system allows researchers to search all current Congress documents from the main homepage search box or historical documents too. The modern system also has an extensive system of related links that help users to link through different documents and follow a pathway through to information that they are seeking. In terms of capabilities, a lot of this is a repeat, but I will just mention 2 on the bottom of the right-hand side, accounts, which allows you to set up your own user account. You can save searches, you can set up alerts. So if there's a subject matter or a policy area or a specific bill you're interested in, you can save it, you can set up an alert, and you'll be notified as it moves through the legislative process through your email. Also, there's plenty of help and education. There's a searchable, browsable help available, an A to Z index of resources, a glossary, and our law library colleagues provide training on Congress.gov to the public. And you can, if you have specific questions, you can ask the librarian. There's also links on this page to the collection data set coverage dates and the times of the day that are updated. Next slide, please. Here are 5 other content areas, if you will, that you can access materials potentially of interest. Starting at the upper left is the Constitution Annotated, another product developed within the Congressional Research Service that I'm part of. The Constitution Annotated serves as the Congress's official record of the Constitution for over 100 years, and it explains every provision of the Constitution and how the Supreme Court interpreted those provisions and how they have evolved over the course of the nation's history. Since its launch in electronic form in September of 2019, the Constitution Annotated online has over 2 million visitors and millions of pages of view, educating people across the nation around the world on the U.S. Constitution. To the right of that on the slide is 9 introductory videos explaining each of the common legislative stages, and that the process by which a bill becomes a law. And as you will hear, it's rarely predictable what happens. As much as we lay out what can, Congress will find a new and unique way to executing its constitutional rights. Moving on to the bottom left of the slide are CRS reports. CRS, as previously mentioned, just works for Congress, providing objective analysis and authoritative information in any area of interest within a legislative context. And through this link that you can find at congress.gov, you can search over 8,600 products. 5,400 of them are currently actively maintained, with the remainder of them as a archive, dealing with the legislative agenda as well as operations. Just on congressional operations, there's multiple hundreds of reports describing how Congress goes about their business. Of note, during the pandemic period, CRS prepared for Congress an impressive portfolio of over 1,000 new research products that are regular on COVID-19 from March of 2020 through September of 2020, and continuing now, many of them regularly updated. And to facilitate access, there is a separate searchable, browsable and searchable link to COVID-19 resources on the public website, organized around 23 topics and issues. Moving one to the right, and as Jane was saying, is the Law Library does international comparison law between national and international law, chock full of great content. They mostly do it for Congress, and that's also available through a link on congress.gov. And then finally, also off of the homepage, on the bottom right of the homepage, is a link to a finding aid of the library collection of U.S. founding documents. Final slide, just a reminder, there's my address, but there's also how you get access to congress.gov help, how you can get directly to the Constitution annotated, and to ask a librarian about congress.gov related questions, as well as to CRS reports. Thank you. And yeah, on to copyright.
Thanks very much, Cliff, and thanks very much to everyone for inviting us here. My colleague, Sean, and I are going to be speaking about the Copyright Office. Next slide, Nicole. So this year, the Copyright Office is celebrating 150 years since copyright functions were first centralized in the Library of Congress. To be clear, copyright protection is automatic. You don't need any formalities. You don't have to register your work with the Copyright Office. However, we do want you to know that there are benefits to registering your copyright and recording documents that involve ownership or transfer of copyrights with the Copyright Office. We are an office of public record. We administer the copyright law, and we also provide expert copyright advice to Congress, our federal courts, as well as executive branch agencies. In fact, in my office, we also review copyright laws in other countries. And so we do have an international expertise as well, much like the Law Library and CRS. We have a lot of material on this call, and I'm going to be speaking about 3 of our policy work streams that I think are of interest to all librarians of all shapes and sizes. Next slide, please. First, earlier this year, we completed a major policy study on our law's approach to online liability for copyright infringement. Over 20 years ago, Section 512 of the Copyright Act established a system for copyright owners and online entities to address online infringement, including limitations of liability. And this was done by Congress to actually foster the growth of the entire internet economy. And back in 1998, Congress intended copyright owners and internet service providers to cooperate to detect and address online copyright infringements. And as you might imagine, online infringement is a major issue for all countries around the world. And if you've ever accessed an internet states that has a statement that says the material here has been taken down at the request of the copyright owner, well, then you're with Section 512 in action. Our office has developed an entirely new web page to address these online liability issues and provide public information on the operation of our copyright law in this area. And our 200-page report is the first government report to look at our law in the last 20 years. While we did not recommend any wholesale changes to Section 512, we did identify certain areas where Congress could fine-tune its operation. Congress continues to be interested in this work. They've held a number of hearings this year, and I suspect that it's going to remain on the agenda for next year. Next slide, please. The second point I'd like to raise is that earlier this year, our Supreme Court issued an opinion in a case that involved a state agency infringing the copyright of a film owner. And as a result of the court's decision, copyright owners suffering infringement by state entities cannot seek the remedies provided by the Copyright Act. So the court's decision was based in part by lack of evidence in the legislative record that the state had intentionally infringed copyright, and it's actually quite a complex constitutional case. But as a result, Congress is looking at this situation and whether there's enough evidence of infringement by states, and to assist them, we as the expert agency are actually conducting a public study. We've received public comments, and we're going to be hosting a public roundtable in early December. Next slide. My third example highlights a major policy study we did on Section 108, which is the provision of our law that allows libraries and archives to reproduce and distribute certain copyrighted works without permission on a limited basis for the purposes of preservation, replacement, and research. This exception was drafted and enacted in the analog age over 40 years ago, and it certainly does not address the way copyrighted works are created, distributed, preserved, and accessed in the digital age. For well over a decade, our office has led and participated in major discussions to potentially change and update Section 108. We believe this would better reflect the fact, practices, and principles of the digital age, and how provide better clarity for libraries, archives, and museums. And in this document that we issued 3 years ago, the Copyright Office restated our longstanding belief that this section needs to be updated so that these entities have a balanced set of exceptions in order to fulfill their very important missions. And an important objective of this document was to provide a concrete framework for further discussion among stakeholders. In this report, we actually provided a model legislation that we hoped would produce more discussion. So we'll wait and see what the next Congress might do. Congress has not taken any action on that in the last 3 years. Next slide. And as a transition point, it's really important to note that the Copyright Office is in the midst of our multi-year process to modernize and reimagine our entire office, both in terms of our information technology as well as non-IT processes. And we have a web page that I've listed on this slide that describes all the various work streams that we're working on. And on the IT side specifically, we are building a new enterprise copyright system that will integrate and provide improvements to all of the office's operations, including our registration, recordation, public record, and licensing applications, and among some other things. So I'm gonna say thank you, gracias, spasibo, merci, takuyu, right now, and pass the baton to my colleague, Sean Gallagher, who is gonna be speaking on our work involving our online public record system. Sean.
Hey, thanks, Maria. And I know we're running a little short on time, so I'll try to keep this quick. Before we get into the modernized public record, I'd like everyone just to get a brief glimpse of what our existing public catalog looks like right now. And I think we were on the correct slide there, yep. So this is our current public catalog, which began in 2007. Because of that, you can see the interface is a little bit outdated. It has some really strict formatting rules when you're searching for information. You need to include leading zeros in registration numbers. And the search bar that you see there is actually a left anchored search. It's not a keyword search like you may be used to in many of the popular search engines out there. We've also had people complain about the 10,000 result limit that this system currently provides because they'd like to see as much of the copyright data as they can in their searches. And this system is based off of a library-centric cataloging system, so it doesn't provide easy search options to find copyright-specific information, such as parties to recorded documents or claimants for registered works. There's also a really small button over to the right that allows you to set search limits, but it's not very intuitive once you get into your search results. And you can visit that right now at that web address on the bottom left at cocatalogloc.gov. So moving on to the next slide. We'll show you a preview of what our new public record system will look like. It's got a much more modern interface with a simple search bar right there in the middle. It allows for flexible formatting, so you don't need to worry about leaving zeros or hyphens in your copyright numbers if you're searching for those directly from that keyword search. We do have an advanced search button below that I'll show in just a couple slides. We provide dynamic filters that allow you to see how your results change as you filter by the different types of records that we have here at the Copyright Office, as well as the different classes and different works that you may be searching for. And again, in that advanced search, I'll show you that we provided some fields where you can specifically search for copyright relevant information beyond the traditional information that you would find in a library catalog. We also provide a couple of links at the bottom of the page to our copyright research services if you're not able to find what you're looking for through our new modernized portal. So moving on to the next slide, we'll show you a brief quick search of a book called Goodnight iPad that Dr. Hayden sent out as a message to us for a virtual Take Your Children to Work Day, which was a favorite of mine. So when you perform a simple search here from the keyword, you'll see that you can sort those results with that little button by everything you'd expect, by alphabetical and by date. And then in our search results, we show you 5 key fields, at least for these registrations. You'll see a title, registration number, date, type of work, and the claimant. Now on this book spine, you'll see it's written by Android, but here it says David Milgram. So if we click into that search result, on the next slide, we'll show you the detailed record view where we've expanded the concerned parties section, and you can see that the authorship on application is Android, and that's actually a pseudonym of David Milgram, who's the author. So moving on to the next slide, we'll show you another search for Toni Morrison's Beloved. And right here, our search results, we can filter those by registration records. And when we do filter by a record type for registration, you see that the date types that we have will change to those that are specific to registration. So you'll see the effective date, publication dates if available, and date of creation. You can also filter registrations by the class and item type. And again, the fields that we provide in the search are specific to registration items. If we switch over to recorded documents on the next slide, you'll see that the 5 main key fields actually change. We keep title and we keep the copyright number, but in this case, it's document number and the date of recordation. But instead of showing the claimants, we're showing you the parties, if applicable, for any works that have been transferred from one person to the other. Again, the dates are specific to recorded documents, so you'll see a date of recordation and a date of certification. And then again, you'll be able to filter further on recorded documents by the different types that we record here at the office. The next slide will show you our advanced search, where again, you'll see fields that you recognize, such as the author and title, but then again, we also include the copyright numbers field, which you can search either recordation numbers or registration numbers, or search both if you have a number and you're not sure. We also provide specific searches for the claimants, and again, you'll see party 1 and party 2 there if you know a party to a document. And of course, all the standard identifiers we are including as well in this search. And I believe the next slide shows an example of what this would look like. So again, here in the advanced search, we're specifying at the top that we're looking only for registration records. We're looking for a title that contains Hunger Games, and we're looking for a claimant that contains Collins. When we execute that search, we'll see that our first result that pops up is for the Hunger Games, and you'll see Suzanne Collins' name there in the claimant field in the lower right-hand side of those search results. So moving on to some of the features that we hope to share in the future when we release to the public, you'll be able to select the multiple records and click that little email button there to be able to share those records back to your own email account or to a colleague. Again, the kind of same sort features that you'll find in any standard search engine. We've also included a highlighting feature that you can toggle. You'll see that little toggle for highlight on right there. Some of our records, when you search for a term that's very common, such as love, which we've searched for here, it doesn't always appear in the title or in one of those first 5 key fields that we show in the search results. So we've added a little highlighting feature at the bottom, which tells you where your search term was found within our records. So we do hope that people are able to use this system when we come to the public release. And I think on the next slide, we'll just wrap up. And I'd like to thank everyone for your attention on behalf of Maria and the office and myself. If you'd like to hear more about our modernization efforts or learn more about the Copyright Office, you can visit us at copyright.gov. And I think now I'd like to hand over to Kate Zward to talk to you more about LC Labs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sean. Thanks to our hosts and to all of you who are joining this event. It's such an incredible treat to have the opportunity to share with you a few things about my small slice of the library, which is the Digital Strategy Directorate to include LC Labs. In this talk, I'll give you a brief overview about our digital strategy and share how the LC Labs team helps demonstrate possibility and share practical experience so that the many facets of our organization can be engaged in the digital future of the Library of Congress. Can I have the next slide, please? The library's first digital strategy was released in September 2018, along with the broader strategic plan that Mark talked about. It describes how we want our programs, collections, and services to reach and impact our audiences using technology. LC Labs and the Digital Strategy Directorate is the digital experimentation arm of the library. We try things out, create new pathways and processes for things that haven't been done before, and help to demonstrate possibilities. Labs works collaboratively across the library and with external partners by supporting a process of experimentation, sponsored research, and collaborative engagements. Our goal always is to center, uplift, inspire, and enable the experts at the library who are constantly considering how to meet their mission as technology changes. We don't enact the digital strategy. We help other people do that with their own expertise. We see ourselves as a bridge between the digital strategy and the domain experts throughout the library, helping the organization articulate its vision for continued digital transformation and thinking of ways together of charting a path to get there. Next slide. The first section in the digital strategy, which you can read at loc.gov/digital-strategy, is all about opening up access to our collections, our staff, and the general goodness of the library to the broader public. This is, of course, our job in libraries and something we're always working toward, but we include it here as a renewed commitment to it. This includes growing our collections with a focus on born digital material, expanding and clarifying rights metadata to help users make determinations of use in accordance with copyright, and supporting new and emerging styles of use and research of our content. I'm proud to share that the library is making progress on all these fronts, including continued work to broaden the types of material we can accept through legal deposit. We've convened a cross-institution working group that is working through the challenging and complex world of rights statements on our website with the goal to make things more clear, consistent, and machine readable. And we're working on getting more collections available in ways that support digital scholarship projects by releasing our API and 25 million bibliographic records and supporting several demonstration projects and improving documentation. And I want to quickly talk about one project in particular that I think is of labs that sort of exemplifies this interest in supporting emerging styles of research. A primary tool of labs is experiments. These are small technology projects that we host for about 2 years. And after those 2 years, we either responsibly retire them or they have been transitioned to another part of the library. A good example of how labs experiments in this area is a residency program we run called Innovator in Residence. We put out an open call every year for people to propose high impact, short-term projects that creatively think about our services or collections. And I'll talk to you about 2 projects this year, the 2 innovators this year who have just wrapped up. Their names are Brian Fu and Ben Lee. Brian's project was called Citizen DJ, you can see that on the left, where he collaborated with library staff to make a website that lets users create hip hop music by remixing sounds from our audio and moving image collections. We were careful to properly contextualize this material and also link it back to its source so that creative artists would also be drawn further into the collections. This received a really incredible response, both from professional musicians and from people who are looking for ways into our collections. I really encourage you to go try it out. It's really fun to use. The other innovator in residence for 2020 was Ben Lee. Ben's project is called Newspaper Navigator. You can see an image of it on the right. It applies machine learning to extract and caption photographs and illustration from our historic newspaper collection to enhance access to image content. The collection of newspapers he worked on, called Chronicling America, is composed of digitized newspapers from across the country from as far back as the mid-1600s. These newspapers document history, culture, languages, media, and countless other subjects. He then created a website to allow users to search those captions and apply on-the-fly machine learning to refine the search to include images that look like the ones the user selected. And this is just one of countless ways we're exploring machine learning at the library that I will talk about a little bit later. Next slide, please. The next area of the digital strategy is about connecting. And by connecting, I mean inspiring users to have a continuous, ongoing, and deep relationship with the library. We aim to do this by bringing the library to its users, into the digital neighborhoods that they usually find themselves in, by welcoming other voices through crowdsourcing and participatory archives, and by driving a momentum in our communities so that we can work with our peer organizations to create an ecosystem of sustainable digital transformation. Jane and Robin talked a little bit about By the People program, which is a key component of this effort. So, but we're running a little bit out of time, so I'm going to skip this section, except to encourage you to visit it at crowd.loc.gov and try some transcriptions on your own. The last and final area of the digital strategy is explicitly forward-looking. It asks us to not just consider the needs that we have today, but consider technologies that are apparent and that we know will present challenges and our opportunities in the future. I'll talk next about some LC Labs work that we've engaged in this facet of the strategy. Machine learning presents a potential transformative technology in our space, as you all know. Machine learning is not new to libraries. Optical character recognition actually uses it, and that's been in place in our domain for about 20 years. And we now often encounter machine learning in our everyday lives, in photo sharing apps, for recommendation engines, email filters that help sift through relevant content from a sea of data. But there are risks and challenges as well that we need to thoughtfully engage in. To begin to investigate this promise versus reality around using machine learning in libraries, LC Labs embarked upon a multi-pronged approach. As I mentioned, all of what I've shared with you today can be found on labs.loc.gov. And in there, you'll find our work on machine learning, including reports from sponsored research, experiments that we've done, and a report from our Machine Learning and Libraries Summit that we hosted last summer. I particularly recommend checking out the report from Dr. Ryan Cordell. He does a nice job of summarizing the potential opportunities and risks around using machine learning in libraries, and clarifies a central role that libraries can play in determining how this technology is developed and implemented. That's the end of my time to share with you today about the LC Labs team and the digital strategy. Thanks so much for your attention, and I look forward to your questions. Next up is Karen Kenninger from the National Library Service for the Blind and Print Disabled.
Hi, everybody. Am I on? Can you hear me?
Yes, you're live, Karen.
Oh, excellent. Okay. I'm happy to be here to wrap up with all the exciting things that is happening at the Library of Congress. What I want to do is talk to you about 5 ways that going digital is enhancing access for people who can't read print because of a visual, physical, or perceptual reading disability. So I'd like to cover very quickly digital talking books, digital braille, digital distribution and access, digital exchange under the Marrakesh Treaty, and digital preservation. And I'm going to see if I can do that really fast. So next slide, please. About 20 years ago, the NLS program moved from cassette tapes to the DAISY format that is a digital format of talking books. The DAISY format has actually got some really good features to it, one of which is that you can navigate and find things in the audio files because they're marked up in such a way that you can go to the beginning of a new article or a section or a chapter. So another thing is that because they're digital and because our patrons like to speed things up, it doesn't distort the voice when you speed it up or slow it down. So those are a couple of really good things about the DAISY talking books. But another thing that is really helpful about them is, next slide please, that they are downloadable, that they can be, we have a download service called BARD, and the download service allows all of our patrons to have access 24/7 anywhere in the world to 130,000 titles that they can download and play on their own devices, their apps, or apps for iOS, iPads, iPhones, that sort of thing, and Android and some Kindle devices. So there's a lot of advantages in having the digital files because of the fact that they can be moved around much more readily than the old cassette tapes or the old records that is part of our history. So the next slide is going to talk about digital Braille. Braille is a blind person's literacy medium. Unlike audio, Braille is a direct corollary to print. And NLS has been in the Braille business since 1935, or 1931. But we started getting digital files of our Brailles from our producers and started putting them up on the web in 1999 so that people could download them and read them. The disadvantage to a digital Braille file, of course, is that you have to have something to render the digital Braille on. And for these last 20 years, we have depended on our patrons to buy themselves a refreshable Braille device that they could then use to read digital Braille. The cost of these devices has been traditionally very high, up in the thousands of dollars, and a great number of our patrons just couldn't afford to have them. So now we are adding the Braille e-readers to our program so that any one of our patrons who wants to read digital Braille will be able to do so. And so instead of big and bulky and hard copy books, we have a device which is about the size of a paperback book that can hold hundreds of digital Braille books at the same time. And the reader can search, they can bookmark, they can readily navigate these books, none of which you can do with a hard copy Braille book. So now the main problem, for me at least, becomes not shipping and storing and handling bulky Braille volumes, but simply, which book should I read next? New slide, please. The Marrakesh Treaty is a treaty that has been ratified and put into practice in the United States recently. And this treaty allows us to participate with our other treaty partners in exchanging cross-border content, accessible content, for the use of people around the world who qualify because of physical, visual, or perceptual reading disabilities. So one of the big advantage to the digital formats in this setting is that we can very readily distribute or share a digital file with our partners. And these are organizations that are all vetted. So, and we're well within the copyright law now. A couple of years ago, my colleague in Australia asked me, could she please have a copy of a book that we had in Braille, because she had a student who really needed to have it for a class. And I could have just attached it to an email and sent it to her, but I'd have been breaking copyright law because we weren't part of the treaty yet. So today, in that day, the student didn't get the book, didn't have it available to read, and had to go to his class without the book. Today, we can send that book to them. They the kid could have gotten the book and read it for his class now. So that's one of the big advantages of the digital format of the talking books and Braille books that we do. The last thing that I wanted to chat about, next slide please, is the preservation of Braille music especially. Music is part of a Braille code that is complex and usually takes expensive and very highly trained people to transcribe print music into Braille music because the code is pretty complicated. We do have probably the world's largest Braille music score collection, but a lot of it's getting older, and a lot of it's getting a bit deteriorated. And yet this is classical music and music that doesn't, that people want. So what we're doing is we are actually scanning that music, and the scanner will look at the Braille dots on the front side of the page and the back side of the page, because we have interpoint Braille that Braille's on both sides of the page. And then it will convert it to a digital Braille format. Now, the current system is pretty good, but it's not as good as we'd like it to be, because it still makes too many mistakes. So we are working with some colleagues in the Library of Congress to build better equipment so that we would be able to have a cleaner scan of this Braille music and be able to preserve it for the ages. And once it is scanned, it will be able to be posted on BARD, which is our download service, so that people can get to it very readily. And we won't lose that one fragile copy that got mailed out and wrecked. So these are just some of the things that we're doing. And these are ways in which going digital is really improving access for people with print disabilities. So I kind of flew through that. I hope it made sense. Thank you so very much.
Alrighty. Hi everyone, my name is Kirsten. Next we will be doing some question and answers. So, let's see. Let's start with the first one that was written earlier on. This was, I believe, to Robin. The question is, do you also have migration stories collections?
Thank you for the question. So migration stories, meaning in terms of story maps in particular, or collections? I guess I'm trying to figure that out. But what I can tell you is, in a broad variety of the collections we have, there have been, there are collections that come together, whether if it's published migration stories, or whether there are things that might be coming together through any work of people that are now in the manuscript collection. We've often documented some of these things in our blog from four corners of the world. There was a story map, I believe, that was done by a junior fellow or intern that we had that produced something. So I think we have pieces of this, but I don't know that we would have a dedicated collection that this person may be thinking of.
All right, perfect. So for anyone else who's still an attendee, if you have any questions, please type it also right into the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. For now, until we get some more questions in there, we'll actually work through a couple questions that were put in on the registration form. So let's see. So one question asked in the registration form was, what opportunities will be open to the library in the new administration?
So this is Mark. I'll start that. The Library of Congress, I mean, there's only one position that's a presidential appointment. That's the Librarian of Congress, and she serves a 10-year term. So we're not like the executive branch, where there can be a wholesale turnover of the leadership in a particular agency when there's a change of administration. Perhaps the best thing that I could do is maybe turn this over to Cliff, because CRS does quite a bit to get not so much the new administration, but to get the new Congress established in their work. So Cliff, new members.
Yes. So at the beginning of each Congress, actually starting now, is our analysts, and we have both, our organization consists of about 600 folks with about 400 analysts and 100 librarians. And each of the analysts are creating what they think Congress is going to be interested in hearing about, and we put together a research agenda that then the director and the deputy director of CRS go over to our oversight committees and they review. In addition, our different divisions, they're meeting with committees and reviewing what we're planning to do to make sure that we're aligning with the priorities of the majority and the minority moving forward. And that culminates with a whole new batch of reports in January within the legislative framework of issues of concern to Congress. We also, every 2 years with the start of a new Congress, is put on a program. Typically it's down in Williamsburg for new members of the House with a number of our staff giving presentations. However, this year with the pandemic, the plans are being slightly being modified to fit the use cases and the needs and the realities of the current environment.
Thank you for that thoughtful response. I have another question from Stephanie Robertson, who asks, how could I prepare now for a possible career in the Library of Congress someday?
So this is Robin. I'll try to quickly weigh in on that from a library service perspective. Certainly there are a broad variety of positions that the library has, and you've just heard about many of them from my colleagues. So it really depends on the avenue in which you're interested. If you're interested in one of the library services positions, the sort of traditional positions associated with National Library functions and the collections, there are a series of ways to do that. Whether it's obtaining a library degree, obtaining an archival degree, working in a variety of positions. We have technician positions, which are in a different grade and path level than librarian and archivist positions. And so there are a variety of ways in. I would also say that we have several programs that we can mention. So we have a junior fellows program that comes in, and it used to be an in-person program that this last summer it transitioned, but it gives a person an opportunity to work within the library in certain sections, in all of the sections, I think most of the ones you heard today, and do a project, meet people, network with people that are in there and find out more about the jobs. And then the second option, and this one's a little bit more exclusive in terms of number of positions, but we have a librarian residence program where we bring people in for a 6-month term as a entry-level librarian, and that's sometimes extendable to 10 months. But our goal is that the groups in library services that are posting these positions have a position available sort of at the end, and it would be an open competition. It's not something that would just slot in, but it gives someone 6 to 10 months to work in a position, get an idea of whether or not they like the position or they want to pursue something else in the library, and you get to learn a lot more about the library and then potentially apply for a competitive position at the end. So that's a couple different ways.
Thanks, Robin. I have a question from Sarah S., who's joining us today, and she says, in what ways does the Library of Congress collaborate or interact with other national libraries?
This is Mark. I'll take that. Well, we collaborate with libraries in lots of different ways. You know, those 4 functions that I talked about at the beginning. I mean, obviously for in terms of discovery, you know, our bibliographic standards that we use are used worldwide. So that's certainly not exclusive to the Library of Congress, and we're doing really good work there in terms of, you know, BibFrame as a successor to the MARC format. So there's quite a bit of exchange there in the cataloging world. We have agreements all the time with other national libraries. Some of them would have to do with digitization of collections. Sometimes those are unification type projects, you know, whether it's the BNF or the British Library or other organizations. Our preservation department shares its expertise with other national libraries. Often this could be around could be a national natural disaster or civil unrest. We were involved in working with the Japanese after the Fukushima incident. We were involved in Egypt when there was a library was damaged as a part of the spring event. You know, we've collaborated in, you know, many different ways. Obviously, you know, IFLA is one of the ways where we come together with our other national libraries, sharing our expertise in the work that we're doing. As far as, I guess, Marrakesh, as Karen mentioned, is another avenue where we can, you know, work with other national libraries for that particular community. Those are, I guess, just a couple of good examples.
Hello, this is Jane Sanchez in the Law Library. I also have a couple examples. When the Taliban destroyed the legal collection in Afghanistan, the Law Library digitized what we had for the Afghanistan materials and sent it to Afghanistan. Likewise, in Haiti, the legal collection there was destroyed by earthquake or typhoon or whatever. And so the Law Library also provided everything that we had for them, for Haiti, and sent it to them. So we definitely do work within the National Library sphere, if you will. I think there's a general sense that we're all in this together. And so we help each other out. And I hope those are two good examples.
Great, thank you. And it looks like we also have another question. This is from Winston. Can you tell us a little briefly about the relation between the Library of Congress and the National Archives?
Robin, do you want to handle this one, or?
I was waiting for you, Mark. So how about I start and you can complete. Clearly, we have two separate national entities here, and but I would say that Dr. Hayden has a very strong relationship with David Ferriero, who is the Archivist of the United States, or AOTIS, as he likes to refer to himself on Twitter. And we have had opportunities to talk and work together on a variety of groups. We also have several federal groups in which library staff participate on. And so working with the National Archives and also with Smithsonian and museums, we have preservation groups, we have archival description groups, so there are digitization standards groups. So lots of things where we're working closely with our partners there. The library has also had sort of long collaborations with some of our collections, including those in the prints and photographs area. You saw that I mentioned, for example, some of the Dorothea Lange photographs, and those were from federal agencies. And normally, those would often be part of the National Archive as an archive of another federal agency. But through work together in the past, we've been able to have them placed at the library and be able to share them and provide access to them. So that's a start. More on that one, Mark?
Well, obviously, the Library of Congress has archival collections. However, our scope of collecting is significantly different from NARA's, in that NARA obviously is collecting the records of the United States federal government. We do have, well, one obvious similarity is that we have the papers of the first 23 presidents. whereas the NAR has responsibility through the presidential libraries for Hoover to the Obama administration. You know, we also, obviously, we have a pretty well-established web archiving program at the library. And, you know, one part of that is that we take a special interest in harvesting information about the legislative branch, whereas NARA, you know, would be focused on, you know, the rest of the federal government. But I mean, they're here in town, and you know, there's all sorts of ways for us to collaborate. Obviously, a lot of the researchers that we see in our reading rooms here are also, you know, at the Smithsonian libraries or at NARA, conducting, you know, research, you know, out of our collections.
Thanks. And we have another question from Sue Gardner, who asks, after the pandemic subsides, how can people visit the Library of Congress?
Again, I can start this one and have my colleagues join me. So the library has been planning a phased reopening for quite some time, and we're actually in the very early phases right now. We have an electronic resources center open. As I described earlier, we have over 1,000 resources that are available, but they're available in person, so people can come to the library and use those now. As we move into phased reopening, we'll be reopening sections of our reading room, of the reading rooms, I should say, that we have in groups, so that we can gradually begin to open up those. And so the library is not moving to a complete sort of on-off switch style reopening, but rather a safe and measured phased reopening. So right now we're in phase 2. When we move to the next phase and announce that we'll be reopening some of our reading rooms, beginning with manuscripts, newspapers and current periodicals, and the geography and map reading rooms. I think I got them all. Then we will let people know, and we'll make it available, make the information available online. Additionally, in terms of just visiting to see the library, there's so much more. If you go into the Jefferson building with all of the exhibits and the historic artwork in the main reading room, and your ability to, as you're touring there, potentially get a researcher card, then that will come at a slightly later phase than some of our reading room reopenings. And that will be open to sort of timed ticketed entry, and that information as it comes forward will be available online as well. If you're talking post-pandemic, we would love to have people come and visit us when we're fully open as well. I would highly encourage a tour. I had worked with the Library of Congress for about 25 years before I started working at the library, and did not know many of the sort of vast wonders about the collection and some of the information provided by our volunteer and visitor services departments. And so it's a great way to start off in the Jefferson building and find out a lot about the library, and then from there move into the reading rooms.
I guess I would just add to that, you know, I was talking about, you know, the goals of our strategic plan, you know, the enhancing services. Well, part of that is about transforming our in-person experiences here at the library. And even though the pandemic has us limiting the public at this time, we're in a major undertaking now to modernize the experience you're going to have in our historic Jefferson building. We're in the processes of designing and will be constructing a new treasures exhibit at the Library of Congress, which will give, you know, in-person visitors an opportunity to see, you know, the items that, you know, they probably most want to see if they're visiting Washington. You know, we're also going to create a first-class orientation experience, which includes an Oculus that will connect the Jefferson collection at the Library of Congress up to, you know, through our main reading room into the architecture of the interior dome. We're also working on developing a lab-like experience that will be available in the historic Jefferson building. But, you know, whether you're coming here to visit any one of our more than a dozen reading rooms that we have, you know, we also have, we have films, we have presentations, we have book readings, we have musical performances. There's just a wealth of cultural experience that you can have here. And if you come at the right time of year, maybe you'd even catch the National Book Festival. This year that was virtual, but in years past, we've had it at the Convention Center here in Washington over Labor Day weekend. We draw over 200,000 people for it with, you know, more than 150 different authors. So there's always something going on here at the library physically that, you know, you could take advantage of.
Perfect. All right, so I'm going to be reading off a question also from the registration by a Judy Alspach. It is great to see that the Library of Congress is digitizing materials received from the field offices and putting that content in Stacks 3.0. Will this content be made available in any way through ILL, controlled digital lending, etc., to reach researchers that are not able to come to the reading rooms in Washington, D.C.?
So as I mentioned earlier, as the home of the Copyright Office, we're very, very concerned about rights restricted content. And so at this point in time, we are not in a place to be able to share that information online. In terms of controlled digital lending, the library does not participate in any controlled digital lending at this time. Again, there are a lot of issues involved in this. And while we are HathiTrust members, we did not participate in that controlled digital lending option either. So at this point in time, unfortunately, the answer is mainly the content that's in Stacks would need to have an in-person user.
Yeah, in terms of digitization, you know, I would say that our priority has been that when we are going to invest in money in digitizing items from the collection, that we are digitizing those that don't have restrictions for the most part, so that we can make them as broadly available as possible. You've got to understand, with a collection as vast as the Library of Congress is, you know, we're looking for the greatest impact for the investment that we would place in the digitization. But clearly, you know, we will work on advancing, you know, our ability to manage rights restricted material, and where possible, try to, you know, share it more broadly.
That's great. And it looks like we might have time for just one more question. So this is from registration from Amanda Hildebrand. How does digital scholarship impact your work? How important is collaboration in your work now and in the future of the field of libraries?
So I will jump in, and then I'm going to hand it off to Kate Zwart if she's still with us, because she's done some really important work for the library related to investigating digital scholarship. I would say that we have a lot of collections that are currently inaccessible, and like others, we've been working to make them accessible, from data sets to born digital items that come in as a part of manuscript gifts and manuscript collections. There's a lot of work to be done in order to make those collections available, and then also to be able to have people have the sort of collections as data model, or interact with the data and be able to create new knowledge from it. So as a part of that and getting us to that, Kate started some work at the library, and also has a grant that she's working on that will help us further a little bit more. So Kate, do you want to pick it up from here?
Thanks, Robin. That's really kind of you. Yeah, I think primarily the way we support digital scholarship projects is through the access to materials. So we have an API on our collection site that Robin demoed, the loc.gov site, that allows people to write code to download things in bulk. And we've done a number of demonstration projects about what you could do with the API, and you can find those at labs.loc.gov. We've also released optical character recognition from our newspaper, digitized historic newspaper collection that people are using for digital scholarship projects, along with the 25 million bibliographic records I mentioned. And in addition to sort of just making sure that people who want to do digital scholarship projects can access our materials in ways that are amenable to that, we're also sort of thinking about what service models we could possibly offer. The challenge at the Library of Congress is sort of unique because we are not, unlike most large research libraries, we don't have a defined patron base. We don't have faculty, we don't have students. And so thinking about how you might scale a service model to the infinite is really challenging. And so to that end, we received a grant from the Mellon Foundation a few years ago to do some investigations in how we might use cloud to mediate access to collections. So if, let's say you want to do some research with our web archives, they're not really formatted in a way that makes it easy for people who are doing digital scholarship research to use. But we could allow people to attach compute resources to do that work on their own. So we actually have a call out right now for researchers who want to do digital scholarship projects with library collections. And if you go to the lab site, you can find that. And so we'll host 4 researchers and a few grant-funded support folks just to get the shape of what this might look like. And I'm looking forward to sharing the results with everybody.
And hello, this is Jane Sanchez, Law Library. One of the exciting things that we're working on now with the African and Middle East Division and also with Harvard is identifying Arabic materials. And there's a lab at the University of Maryland that is looking to develop an OCR, optical character recognition process for Arabic materials. So African Middle East Division, the Law Library, and Harvard are working together with this lab at the University of Maryland to identify materials that we can OCR, Arabic materials, and to provide those materials and make them available to people who are doing digital scholarship.
Thank you so much, Jane. I think we are exactly at 3 p.m. right now, and I know our colleagues probably have to catch their transportation, or they have to jump onto another Zoom meeting. And I just wanted to mention that this has been an incredible experience having our colleagues from the Library of Congress speak with us on projects, services, and share some of their perspective with us. So I'm very grateful. We look forward to seeing a lot of you for the next installment. We're hoping to finalize that and share those details. The recording from this discussion is going to be posted on the National Library section, that is IFLA National Library section. And also we're going to be sharing it through the Slavic Reference Service's YouTube channel. And so you'll get it at both locations. And we'll also share PowerPoint presentations and supplemental resources from this panel discussion with everyone. So thank you again, everyone, for coming. This is just the start, and we look forward to more discussions about national libraries. Thank you so much, and thank you again to the LC team.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks, Joe.
Get it.
Thank you.
Joe.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Thanks all.
Kirsten, Olga, Karen, and Bella.